Welcome to the Inverse Happy Hour. I'm Charlie Jane Anders, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I'm going to be reading a selection from a story of mine called Because Change Was the Ocean and We Lived by Her Mercy. You can read the full story online at Lightspeed Magazine, or it's also in an anthology called Drowned Worlds, edited by Jonathan Strahan. And it's about surviving and rebuilding after a catastrophe. So I feel like it's a really appropriate story. And my selection from it starts out in Fairbanks, Alaska. I couldn't deal with life in Fairbanks anymore. I grew up at the same time as the town, watched it go from regular city to mega city as I hit my early 20s. I lived in an old, decommissioned solar power plant with 5 other kids, and we tried to make the loudest, most uncomforting music we could, with a beat as relentless and merciless as the tides. We wanted to shake our cinder block walls and make people dance until their feet bled. But we sucked. We were bad at music and not quite dumb enough not to know it. We all wore big hoods and spiky shoes, and we tried to make our own drums out of dry cloth and clacked wood, and we read our poetry on Friday nights. There were book houses along with stink tanks where you could drink up and listen to awful poetry about extinct animals. People came from all over because everybody had heard that Fairbanks was becoming the most civilized place on earth, and that's when I decided to leave town. I had this moment of looking around at my musician friends and my restaurant job and our cool little scene and feeling like there had to be more to life than this. I hitched a ride down south and I ended up in Olympia, where they were growing their own food and their own drugs and doing a way better job with the drugs than with the food. We were all staring upwards at the first cloud that anybody had seen in weeks, trying to figure out what it could mean. When you hardly ever saw them, clouds had to be omens. We were all complaining about our dumb families, too, all still watching that cloud warp and contort, and I found myself talking about how my parents only liked to listen to this boring boo-pop music with the same 3 or 4 major chords and that cruddy A, 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 B, 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 C, D, E, C, D, E rhyme scheme, and how my mom insisted on saving every scrap of organic material we ever used and collecting every drop of rainwater. It's fucking pathetic is what it is. They act like we're still living in the middle of the Great Decimation. They're just super traumatized, said this skinny gender freak named Julia, who stood nearby holding the bong. It's hard to even imagine. I mean, we're the first generation that takes it for granted we are going to survive as, like, a species. Our parents, our grandparents, their grandparents, they were all living like every day could be the day the planet finally got done with us. They didn't grow up having moisture condensers and mycoprotein rinses and skinsis. Yeah, whatever, I said. But what Julia said stuck with me because I had never thought of my parents as being traumatized. I just always thought that they were just really tightly wound and judgy. Julia had these 2 cones of dark, twisty hair on her head and a red pajama suit, and she was only a year or 2 older than me, but seemed a lot wiser. I want to find all the music that we used to have, I said. You know, the weird, noisy shit that made people's clothes fall off and their hair light on fire. The rock and roll that just listening to it turned girls into boys. The songs that took away the fear of God. I've read about it, but I've never heard any of it. And I don't know how to play it. Yeah, all the recordings and notations, they all got lost during the dataclysm, Julia said. They were in formats that nobody can read, or they got corrupted, or they were printed on these discs made out of petroleum. Those songs are gone forever. I think they're under the ocean, I said. I think they're down there somewhere. Something about the way I said that helped Julia to reach a decision. Hey, I'm heading back down to the San Francisco archipelago in the morning. I got room in my car if you want to come with. Thank you very much.
To start, I know that you're working on a special cause right now. If you want to give us a little sense of this project you're working on that you want us to talk about.
Yeah, so during this period of social distancing and quarantine and lockdown and all that stuff, I'm really worried about what's going to happen to independent bookstores, local bookstores, because I feel like as someone who loves books and cares about like my book community, independent bookstores are incredibly important and they're really irreplaceable. And the past 10 years, independent bookstores have actually been doing pretty well. They've been bouncing back after a rough time in the 2000s. And, it's been a really good time for independent bookstores, but that's about to possibly change unless we do something. Everybody's had to close their doors and they're not making any money. People have really tight margins, and booksellers are just the greatest people I know. They care so much about books, and I just want to do everything I can to support bookstores. So we've started a thing called hashtag We Love Bookstores, and we have a website at welovebookstores.org. And it's just supporting local San Francisco Bay Area bookstores, but we strongly encourage people to start things like this in their cities. So basically, what we've been doing is we've been organizing events to with authors, like live streamed events, to raise money to save bookstores. There's going to be events every Wednesday at noon PST or 3 p.m. Eastern time, starting tomorrow. And tomorrow's event has Michael Chabon and Ayelet Waldman, two incredible authors who also were both writers on the show Picard, Star Trek Picard. And I'm going to be talking to them tomorrow at noon PST or 3 p.m. Eastern. And there's just so many great events after that. And every Friday at noon, we're going to be having a children's book author or two children's books authors as like a kind of, give the parents a little bit of a break kind of thing. So we're just hoping to raise a ton of money for local bookstores because we're really, really worried about them and what's going to happen to them. And we just want to shower them with love, but more importantly, with cash.
That's great.
So
That's really nice.
welovebookstores.org.
Welovebookstores.org. Awesome. For anyone tuning in right now, we've got Charlie Jane Anders. She's promoting a program called welovebookstores.org, and this is Inverse Happy Hour, an Instagram live show where we talk to our favorite authors. So I wanted to ask you a question about your writing. Something I've noticed in that story and in other stories. You're just so good at world building, at like putting in all these little details. So there's so many like made up words that just immediately make me think of something. I'm curious, how does that come to you? What's the process like for creating these worlds that are so textural?
I mean, it's a lot of stumbling around in the dark. It's a lot of just trying to figure out how things actually work and like what kind of stuff people have. Like in this passage I just read, there was some slang and some weird clothes and stuff, but there was also just like little touches about like how people are surviving after, in the wake of like the great, decimation. Things like moisture, I forget exactly what the term was, but it was like moisture condensers, mycoprotein rinses. So like basically people are living off some kind of mushroom kind of fungus diet and finding ways to collect water when there's like droughts and stuff. And stuff like that, I just, I try to think about how that's going to work, but also think about what's going to serve the story and what's going to make sense for the characters and just the story that I'm trying to put together. So that's the most important thing for me is that it kind of serves the story, I guess. But it's also just about trying to kind of take a step back and think about like the big picture of like what a realistic world would be like. But also, I mean, I grew up reading stuff like Philip K. Dick, and I don't know, Rudy Rucker has a lot of great like stuff where he'll just throw in lots of weird ideas and through weird terms and weird slang. And it's just like you have to kind of just keep up with it. And like I love that kind of stuff in science fiction where you just have to keep up and they're throwing balls at you and you just have to catch them all. And I feel like that can be really fun.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's great. I love just all the little words, all the ideas, like how will people survive post in a future where like they figured out these things about climate change. It's really interesting. Oh, I lost you for a second.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
So one person wanted to ask you just how are you doing in quarantine? What are you doing to stay sane? How's it going?
It's tricky. There's some days are easier than others. It's like, I don't know. I'm hanging in there. I think we're all really having a hard time right now because it's hard to structure your time. It's hard to deal with like all the stuff little things that I used to do that involved some kind of human contact, like going to coffee shops or whatever, going to bookstores. I miss bookstores a lot. I miss my local comic book store. All that stuff is really hard. I think that what I'm doing is trying to just block out periods of time to get writing done. And luckily, I'm working really closely with people on this bookstore fundraiser. So that's some human contact that I'm getting right there. Taking dance breaks. I actually posted a video the other day of me doing a dance break on Instagram, but I'm going to do more of those on Instagram, I think, because I take dance breaks pretty often. It's a major part of my coping strategy. And I just, I try to get enough sleep, but also get up early enough so that I can get my shit together. And, that's all I can do.
Yeah. I think those are all good things to do. This kind of thing works too, right? Just like trying to do video chats with people is like a decent approximation.
For sure.
So I know you mentioned Picard earlier. I'm curious if you're a fan of the show, and also, do you have any thoughts on what could come next if they do a second season?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love the show. I think it's really fun. It's just Patrick Stewart. I could watch Patrick Stewart like read the frickin' phone book and it would be amazing. He's such a great actor. That whole cast is great. Like I loved all the new characters. I loved Rios. I loved Agnes, and what's the name of the Romulan guy? I don't know. It's a really fucking great show. I love it. It's really fun. And it's great to be back in the future of Star Trek again after, so many shows set in like the time before the original series or right after it's great to be back in like the future. And I'm so excited for season 2. And I'm excited for more Star Trek Discovery because they're in the future now too, which is even better. I hope season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, my fondest wish actually from that show is Beverly Crusher. Like nobody talks about Beverly Crusher, but I feel like she was his, he had like such an intense relationship with her. Like I feel like they kind of had an on again, off again romance, but also they were just really good friends, and they had been close to each other before Star Trek The Next Generation, and they stayed close. And if you watch All Good Things, it's like 30 years later and they're still close. I feel like I want to know what Beverly Crusher has been doing.
That's a good point. I hope they bring that into the new season.
Hope, I don't know what Gitz McFadden is doing right now, but I hope she's available.
Yeah, we'll bring her on the show. We'll find out. Anything else that you've been watching or reading that you would recommend to people who are looking for something to fill the time right now?
Yeah, I mean, I love the show I Am Not Okay With This, which is on Netflix. That's an amazing show. I love that show. It's so great. I love the current She-Ra. Steven Universe Future just knocked my freaking socks off. Books I've been reading recently, Beneath the Rising by Premi Muhammad is a fucking amazing book. Also, what was the other one? Just published today, Bonds of Brass by Emily Skritsky is a great young adult space opera. It's so exciting. It's full of action and adventure and relationships, and it's just so fun. I'm in the middle of that right now. The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin is rocking my world. Those are things that are out right now. Docile by K.M. Spera is fucking great. There are so many good books out right now. Actually, it's a fucking great time for books.
Good timing. Everyone's stuck at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you one more question that I'm trying to ask everyone, which is, what do you think is the power of fiction and science fiction in particular at a time like this when we maybe need a little hope? I think your story was a good example, but what do you think? What can science fiction do?
I mean, I think it's really essential because science fiction is the storytelling that helps us to cope with the future. And I think that, a friend of mine always says that if we keep telling stories about apocalypses, we're going to have an apocalypse, which I actually think that that's half true. I think that there are stories we can tell about apocalypses. Like the story I just read was a post-apocalyptic story, but it was a hopeful post-apocalyptic story about surviving and rebuilding and coming together and having, community and togetherness in society after a disaster. And I feel like that's something that I would love to see more of in science fiction. I feel like science fiction is really good at showing us how different ways that we could rebuild and be together, and different just possible futures that we could all see ourselves in. And hopefully part of the way that we all see ourselves in it is that we get futures that include all of us and don't just include the small number of people who, used to be kind of included in science fiction stories. But, you know, also, I think anything that helps us to kind of, I mean, I just did a TED talk about this. Anything that helps us to imagine the future and see ourselves living in the future is really key to survival and key to getting through tough times. So I think that that's the main thing. Just anything that strengthens our imagination is really good.
That's great. I think that's beautiful. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go.
Okay, thank you so
But
much. Yay.
yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Again, this is Inverse Happy Hour, and we are talking to Charlie Jane Anders. So you should go check out welovebookstores.org. And also, if you don't follow Charlie Jane on Instagram or even follow Inverse, follow us so you get more cool content. Thanks so much, and cheers.
Yay. Thanks. Bye.